coup-proofing the military, is what Turabi advised. And what they did is to coup-proof it, is divide the army into competing elements, competing parts, so that neither one of them would be able to carry out actually a coup and get those who are in power, even if they are military, out of the way. And therefore it was divided into competing parts, which is the SAF, the Sudan Armed Forces, the auxiliary forces, which are called the RSF, led actually by rebels in Darfur, because that's where the threat they felt was coming from the state, and the national intelligence and security forces. These three competing elements were directly controlled by Bashir. No connection between the two, any of them, but directly controlled by the center, by Bashir. And this was their way of coup-proofing the military. So you had a divided military. Well, the new element of that is the rapid support forces, which are led by Hemeti in Darfur, actually, because that's where they thought the threat was coming to the control of the military through Bashir, the state, actually. And generally, therefore, it is elements from the peripheries that were utilized. Those who were fighting against other ethnic groups, you know, in Darfur. You've heard of the Janjaweed and all that. They were formed to help the center itself, now controlled by Bashir, to quell any kind of rebellion, you know, coming in the countryside. And therefore, it took sort of the SAF representing the traditional army, where all the officers came from the riverine tribes in Sudan, and the rank and file, who came from the peripheries, particularly in Darfur, in Kordofan, the south, and some perhaps from the east. And therefore, how do we see the war that is ongoing right now is between two contending parts of the army. And therefore, to consider the SAF as the national army and the RSF as what? I don't know. A militia unit, it would not be correct, because in the eyes of those who formed it, these were two elements of the military. It was incorporated into the military. In fact, many of the officers to lead the RSF came from the SAF, were moved actually from the Sudan Armed Forces. Therefore, these are elements, two divisions that were divided for interest of central control, but elements of the same army. It is just that the composition of the SAF is more the riverine Sudanese, as in other words, you know, officers, and the RSF is the region. And therefore, I think it is important to control. Now, the war between the two of them can only be seen as a war between two sections of the military that was formed by the Bashir government for control of the resources and thereby control of power in the country. It is not an ideological difference. Of course, if this continues, and it can only continue because there is no ideological difference between the two of them, if it continues, what we might see is a process of each one of them representing whatever they feel is their political base. The military sort of would be more representing the riverine types, the traditional rulers of the country, and the RSF might, in fact, move towards Darfur, where it is from, because it feels it represents actually the rank and file in the military, and therefore the periphery. It might take a periphery versus center. type of civil war that is low intensity, but a long process actually of fighting. I think it is important to understand where they came from, to understand where they might go, what we might see. In all that, of course, there are those civilians, who would have to come into some form of a united position, who eventually are the owners, actually, of the politics in the country, and the army has to be an instrument of the state. And I think that is why the fighting started now between the two of them, why the military took power, coup took power for the first time in the so-called revolutions in Sudan. This was a time when, for the first time, they did not want to utilize the army, or one part of the army which supported the revolution, so to speak, and for the army was always part of whatever new that came. Well, this time, the mass movement, actually, of particularly the young in Sudan, said no to military control. And when the new government, actually, Hamdok government, was established, they formed a committee that would strip the army of control of the economy, of the economic control. And that's why, in other words, the coup came soon, because what was it called, that committee? Dismantling of the old regime, including freeing, in other words, removing control of resources by the military. That will be a fundamental change, where civilians will come, therefore, to control the military, both through control of the budget and making it just an institution of the state. I will stop there. As a background in our discussion, actually, to keep these ideas, I think, would be beneficial. Thank you. I hope I didn't.
No, you didn't. Thank you very much. That was a very good expose. Let's give him another round of applause. Now, may I have the honor and privilege to invite Ambassador Sati. You'll all agree with me that there are very clear basic ideas that are coming out. Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
15 minutes.
Yes, okay. I'll be. What time is it now? 10:50. So if I by 11:05 have not stopped, let me know. Okay. I have to be German for once. Well, thank you very much for this invitation. Really, the Horn Institute, Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and for the concern, Secretary General, Permanent Secretary, and thank you very much. My former boss, and with whom I have worked for some time, Ambassador Schwenga. Well, Sudan, we come back to Nairobi, Naivasha. We were here for Naivasha. And once again, Kenya comes to, to the rescue through IGAD once more. So Sudan has been, on the agenda probably for too long. And we're here to try and understand why this is the case. My good friend Haile has given us a perspective, actually, a historical perspective and the drivers of conflict in Sudan. And I'm going to build on what Haile has said. Ali Mazrui said it early enough. I was a student at Khartoum University in 1968 when Ali Mazrui, the late Ali Mazrui, came and he said, and he gave a paper titled The Multiple Marginality of Sudan. The multiple marginality of Sudan. And this issue has been with us for some time. What Sudan is really about? Sudan is about diversity, about bringing together various populations from various horizons, coming together to converge and to form a nation and a state. But unfortunately, our politicians and our elite have misunderstood what Sudan was about. Some of us have been saying since the 70s and writing that Sudan, the basic issue of Sudan is a cultural one. You have to deal with culture, cultural diversity, religious diversity, regional diversity, economic diversity, of course, what Hamdouk was trying to do, creating those 5 poles, economic poles in Sudan. But we have failed to do that. Having failed to the south of Sudan has gone. They decided to take their right, and they left. But we regret that this has happened. While being happy for them, we are sorry for Sudan. And we are sorry for ourselves, and we are sorry for Africa. Because many of us thought that Sudan could be a symbol for the African continent, bringing those populations together, bringing, as you rightly said earlier, north, south, east, west, everybody converging together, been talking about the bridge between the North Africa and South Africa, and you have the Sahel, you have the Ethiopian and Eritrean highlands, you have the Great Lakes region, a beautiful country that could have been really a model, has been completely shattered. Sudan is one of those countries, the rare countries that refuse to be part of the Commonwealth. And since that time, it has been seen as the odd one out. How can they, be a colony of the British Empire and they refuse to be part of the Commonwealth? Because we're seeking other horizons and going in other directions. Was it the right decision to have made? The question is open. But in a nutshell, earlier, the issue of coups in Africa have been mentioned, and that some popular coups are taking place in various regions of Africa, the Sahel. While those coups may be popular, the Sudanese one is very unpopular because going in the other direction. This is exactly undoing, as you have rightly said, what the people of Sudan have been trying to do. So it's going in the other direction. Sudan has been plagued with what I call ideological wars for too long. Arabism, Pan-Arabism, Africanism, communism, Baasism, political Islam, militarism has become an ideology in itself. An ideology which is guiding some kind of course, economic interest, as rightly said by my good friend Haile earlier. Failed democratic experience. Sudan was one of the first countries that, as early as 1953, under self-rule, we had the elected government. But this has not worked. 1964, 1985, 2019, and the story continues. I see Sudan as a hyperactive society, which finds it difficult to put some order into this hyperactivity. The vibrancy of the civil society is difficult because for lack of consensus on a national project, everybody is pulling in other direction, and even now we are trying to get this consensus with a lot of difficulties. The issue of resources has been mentioned by Haile also, the inflated military and security budgets, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, what do we have now? We have a situation where we had Baku, and by the way, I call myself the ousted ambassador of Sudan, because I was a few hours after the coup, early morning with 26 October 2021, when I was ambassador in Washington, I was one of the first who went to Al Jazeera and denounced the coup. And I told them, this is wrong. This is wrong. Reconsider your position. You are taking Sudan down, the road to catastrophe. And I have repeated it, all the time I'm talking to him. I said, I'm not saying this from a point of view of hostility. I'm saying it as a brother. and a Sudanese citizen who cares for his country. Do not do it. Do not do it. I was there with Burhan and Hemeti at the, what we call the High Council for Peace before going to Washington. I was dealing with them. I worked with Nimeri as his French interpreter. I worked with Bashir as his ambassador to France. We in the diplomatic corps, we know the military. Many of them have served with us as a defense attaché, and we have no hostility to the army. On the contrary, but we want an army that represents us, that represents the people of Sudan, and that's there to support what the wishes and the aspirations of the Sudanese people, to support democracy, not to go against it. But unfortunately, they never understood this. But we are still there. We are there. We recognize that this is a very delicate situation, a very complex situation, and that we have to talk to them. I worked on Burundi. We worked together on this, Your Excellency, on other issues, and we see you cannot just talk to your friends and make a deal with your friends. You have to talk to those who are carrying the guns, who are behind all those problems. So we are ready to talk to them. But we have to know exactly what we are going to talk about and what is going to be the agenda of this talk and what future you can envisage for democracy in Sudan and for the role of the military, whether it's the SAF, the army, or the RSF, in this formula that are going to work out together. It's not easy. What we have today is a fragmented political class in Sudan, a fragmented civic forces, fragmented security and military structure, and we have to work very hard in order to find a solution, to put all these pieces together and see how we can deal with the various undercurrents of the Sudanese society and rebuild a state. The wars, what is happening now actually is the culmination, I would say, of a very long process. Wars have always been in the peripheries of Sudan for various reasons, for the reasons that have been quoted by Haile before, for the issue of marginalization, which is a real one. There is no doubt about that. Bashir was denying that there is marginalization in Sudan. We said there is marginalization. Marginalization is a fact in Sudan because the socio-economic project that we had contributed to the impoverishment of the production areas. It is not a coincidence that wars are spriting all over the place, where you have gold, where you have, gum arabic, where you have, all these natural resources of Sudan, which are depleted of their resources, of their manpower, and over the infrastructure that they need, because the formula which is adopted for this. For example, the issue of oil. When Sudan discovered oil started exploiting oil, what was the percentage which was allocated to oil-producing areas? 2%. 2%. While this oil is taken out and enriching some people, whether it's in Khartoum or in other regional or international capitals. This model, I think, needs to be changed. The issue of gold also. The issue of gold now is causing a lot of problems. Gold, instead of being used to the benefit of the people of Sudan, is used now to the benefit of the military, whether it's SAF or the RSF, to build themselves, to enrich themselves, and to buy weapons in order to kill the people of Sudan. That's exactly where we are now, unfortunately. And some people in the region and elsewhere are helping them to do that. So I have 3 minutes, so I have to be brief now and wrap up. So there is now, what's happening now is we in the civil movements are getting our acts together, trying to build a cohesive movement, speak with one voice, engage with the AU and the African Union, and engage with IGAD, of course, and Kenya, regional and international partners. But our plea is, you are asking us to unite while you are disunited. You are asking us to unite while you are helping us to disunite. Please, consider this point. From experience, we know no war in any country can be ended if there is no consensus at the regional and international levels. This is a lesson. We do not want Sudan to go the way Syria or Libya. All the signs are there. So please, IGAD, African Union, Jeddah, US, Saudis, UAE, Egypt, and all the others, UN, of course, come together, and we are ready to work with you. We are talking to all of them, actually. But we do not see any progress on that front. The PS has assured us that there are good news that will be coming soon. We welcome that, and we are ready to pick up that and run with it. So we are ready to work with Kenya. I am almost a Kenyan national, by the way. I worked here for the UN for many years, and I'm coming back after being ambassador to the US. I'm coming back to Kenya because we think Kenya is a good country to be. And you are right when you said Kenya is for peace. We know, we have been working with Kenyans. General Simbeye was a good friend of mine. We worked together on Sudan, and the ambassador here, and many others of you. So let us keep this going and consult and talk to all the colleagues, all the ambassadors and representatives around this table.
do not get left out as yes, we have to engage the generals, but the civilians warned us as we were drawing to brewing. So we need to ensure that we bring them back to the fore. And I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
The other gentleman. Kindly keep your questions short and precise so that we can have more people participating.
Thank you very much, and good morning. And I'm happy to be here, and this important event, obviously, with this horrible situation that we are living in Sudan at the moment. Mainly about the sort of the proliferation of peace initiatives or interested parties who would like to mediate. And I see the point there that also there is a certain self-interest in mediation itself, right? They have been also calling for African-led process. Some have been calling for AU-led process, others have been calling for IGAD-led process, and IGAD, of course, has a long tradition and history, if you will, mediating in this region, in the whole of Africa, and of course, in terms of Sudan as well. So I just find that there might be an issue here because we are talking about Sudan, and Sudan has a very, very important connection with Middle East and the Gulf for, obviously, it's a historical connection, it's a current connection. The two, so to speak, belligerent parties, or the main belligerent parties in Sudan, both have deep and important connections to the Gulf. They also have those to Egypt. Can IGAD handle this? There has been quite a lot of attempt to have, so to speak, Middle East external actors on board, and there has been a lot of talks, as the permanent secretary told us, in Jeddah, which failed up until now. But I'm just fearing that if we will be talking about, let's say, IGAD-led process, does IGAD really have the reach and the capacity, which the previous person who was asking a question actually pointed out to? Who has access to these people? Who has the potential to pressure these people, these leaders, to actually affect some sort of a ceasefire, at least, you know? And I think this is an important point. Some people are pointing fingers to the UAE. There are certain different parties possibly involved. What is the role of Saudis here? Egypt has been mentioned before. So if we want to come up with a sort of a peace initiative that's all-inclusive, we need to take this into account. Thank you.
Not least, just behind you. Keep it precise.
Thank you. If I may add my voice to that of others in thanking the Horn for organizing this important meeting. My question goes to Ambassador Haile and Ambassador Sati, but also Ambassador Mwencha can comment on it. I think one of the main challenges that led to the collapse of the political process or the political framework that was signed some time back was the issue of integration of, for example, the RSF into the SAF. My question is, how best can you advise whoever is engaged in this process to deal with this matter? Thank you.
I'd like the panelists to respond, as well as other members of the within. And the first question is about this process that we thought Kenya should lead. And the challenge here is, does Kenya have the access? Ambassador Mencha, I think this is naturally yours.
Yeah, the way the African Union processes work, and I think it's a very good question by my sister Kimani, it's not necessarily to have Kenya, but I think what you said is a panel. You have to have a panel, and that panel must have access. Usually what you would then do in the form of panel and access is to use eminent persons like former heads of state and government, the likes of passengers and the rest who are military. They can go in and sit with them, and then eventually you then can bring it. I can categorically say it is going to be a bit heavy for IGAD to have that, because as you rightly mentioned, as somebody also mentioned, I think you did, because of the Middle East and Sudan is a member of Arab League. And because of that, AU has the capacity, because there is a working relation with Arab League, to bring Arab League, GC, to the table, so that you can now bring then the actors in the Middle East through Arab League. But AU is the only one which has got the capacity to bring it, and then bring in the IGAD. That is just my response.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think the second question was about trying to find out a hurting stalemate for the military. And I think Ambassador Makarios or something? Menkes. Oh, Haile.
Yeah. This is the question of the integration.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I also would like to talk a little bit about the Kenya, instead of Kenyans, and sounding as if they're pushing for their own government. I think it is the most rational. The UN, I've worked in the UN for a long time. I was Under Secretary General responsible for Africa. I know the position of the UN, how it works. It has relegated this affair outside of the UN. The UN is now the key personalities, countries in the UN are preoccupied with their own issues. There is Ukraine, there is other global issues. They are concerned about that. They have delegated it, actually, let it be an African-led process. And eventually, whatever happens, we've described actually what the nature of the war in Sudan is. It is a war to the finish. That is what they are going to go for, the two sections, the factions of the military or the army. And therefore you're going to need pressure, those who have the capacity actually to put pressure on them to stop the war and eventually hand over government actually to civilians. It is going to require concerted effort. That concerted effort could only come if there is a legitimate, in other words, body that could, on behalf of everybody, actually, rally, invite those in. Who can do that? I think it is either the UN or either the AU or IGAD would be appropriately the bodies that would rally others. When Kenya dealt with the peace process between North Sudan and South Sudan, it was Kenya on behalf of IGAD. And this time also, I think it's better not to say Kenya, but it's IGAD that designated Kenya. And then the African Union also seems to endorse, actually. So IGAD and AU working together. And then bringing, well, Kenya didn't work alone in the resolution of the issue between Sudan and South Sudan. There was the Troika, actually, who were working, behind the scene. And therefore, you had everybody. We will need legitimacy of whoever comes with a solution to have all others unite behind it. And the UN to be united behind. The AU will support, actually, a regionally led, the Arab League, well, whether it's the Arab League or the Arab Gulf or whatever. In other words, there is interest in that also. What we need is somebody to rally all those, to provide legitimacy to whatever outcome that comes. And I think it is important to think with the AU working closely with IGAD. And if they have already delegated Kenya, well, why not? It has been done before. And people supported it. The whole United Nations. I was appointed as SRSG, for example, to help implement the IGAD led process that led to the agreement actually for a referendum in South Sudan, and it worked. I think it is important in that fashion. Ethiopia cannot do it because it's an interested party. Others from the region cannot do it, and then it is in East Africa. Well, North Africa, I mean, there is interest also. The Egyptians have an interest, the Ethiopians have an interest, others have an interest actually neighboring to. And Kenya, a little bit removed, it has done it before. Even in personality, actually, who did it, General Simbayo is still around. And therefore, it looks to me, given the multiplicity of marginally involved interests, actually, in pushing for peace in Sudan, it makes sense that an IGAD-designated, AU-supported process would be, I think, supported by everybody. Secondly, on the second issue, this question of integration in Sudan is critical when dealing with the solution. Yes, we could talk a lot. That I talked, for example, Sudan having been more like an empire, and the same thing in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, at least, they recognized, actually, that there was a center that controlled everything, and therefore the solution has to come through the involvement, the engagement, all the different parties, all the different ethnic groups, call them regions in Ethiopia, and that's what they did in 1991. And they came up with this federal setup with the involvement of everybody. Such a thing needs to happen in Sudan as well, so that we do not have a repeat of what happened in South Sudan. South Sudan would not have gone, actually, towards independence. In fact, it was not fighting for independence, it was fighting for democracy inside Sudan. But when that didn't come, they saw actually the option actually is to leave. And particularly, it started with Turabi designating the war against the South, not an anti-insurgency, anti-separatist, which was the designation at the beginning, but as a jihad. The minute he called a jihad, representing the Islamists, then everybody said, aha. So this is actually Muslims against Christians, Arabs against Africans. That is what we used to hear, actually. I was in the UN at that time. That's what led to, and such should be a lesson in addressing, actually, right now also. Instead of just saying, the RSF, the Janjaweed was created by the center itself as an instrument. They're the same, actually. It's a part of the army, actually, to do so. Darfur would go in the direction, in my thinking, Darfur could go in the direction of South Sudan unless the issue of this involvement of all the parts, of all the regions, of all the peoples inside Sudan in the process of peacemaking is. And I think there is enough recognition in the political entities that are there. Ambassador Sati is here. People actually, during the demonstrations, were saying, we are all Darfur. When the issue of marginalized regions was discussed. And therefore, it is critical. I would stop there. I hope I have answered the two questions.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, I would like to ask you, and I think it was there, what would be the incentives? How would we bring a hurting stalemate? It was a technical question, but let's put it this way. How can which incentives would bring these people to the table? And Ambassador, you have about 2 minutes before our time is over.
Okay, thank you very much. There are incentives and there are points of pressure. Those guys have their relations with the Gulf. And they are probably in answer to the question of Professor Alexei, and the role of Kenya. I think that Kenya is IGAD, represents IGAD. IGAD, from a point of view of subsidiarity, is the first port of call, I would say, the entry point into the process. And this legitimacy, institutional legitimacy that Kenya has through IGAD, and in combination with the African Union, can play a leading role, but it is not going to lead alone. It is going to associate others and apportion roles and get an understanding of the various other actors who have vested interest in Sudan. The Gulf was mentioned. The Gulf is paramount. Nothing in Sudan today can be done without the Gulf. Absolutely nothing. Because for a simple reason, for the last 30 years, every economic issue in Sudan and financial issue was dealt with through the Gulf countries under al-Bashir. And this continues to this day. The diaspora in the Gulf is important. Those guys have been dealing with the Gulf in Yemen, sending soldiers and getting the kickbacks and benefits and all that, and using this to strengthen and reinforce themselves. So it is very important to associate the Gulf. Egypt plays a major role in Sudan. Nothing in Sudan can happen without the approval of Egypt. Let us whether we like it or not. Whether we like it or not. So we have to take this into consideration. This is very important. So IGAD, African Union, are our common African house, common African home. But Sudan has another home also. It has the Arab home. Whether we like it or not, there is this split of identity in which we are members of the Arab League also. So how can IGAD and the AU work with the Arab League, with the Gulf, with the Egypt, with the US, with the European Union, with countries like Germany, in order to agree? There is also already the core group, which is there. Why don't you use the core group? It is a mechanism that will bring everybody together. So if the role of Kenya is paramount, it's important, but it cannot play that role alone, of course, we understand that. But how can we get the military to understand that if we can put pressure on them, severing their relations, those who are supplying the guns, those who are supplying the money, how are we going to do that? This is essential and crucial, and it needs to be done. If Kenya can take the lead and talk to those who are supplying them with the guns, at least those who can be spoken to, I think this is going to be a very important issue. The other issue, of course, of the civilians, there is a question about the civilians. So as a civilian, I have to answer this. We are working, we are going at it. It's not easy. I am one of the leaders of the civic groups that are working to get everybody together. We are getting together. We are getting there now. We are getting a coordination committee that's going to lead our action. Probably in the coming 3 or 4 days, we are going to set a coordination committee. We are reaching out to those who are on the other side, those who necessarily do not agree with us, those who supported the coup, but now are against the war. We are talking to them. But at a certain moment also, we need to take to those who are carrying the guns also. So we are there. We are not saying, please invite us to come. We are inviting ourselves and we are imposing ourselves. Nobody can invite us. And no settlement in Sudan can, be achieved without civilian participation. Because the issue at the end of the day is a political one. Those who are carrying the guns are supported by certain political parties. We have to talk to those ones. And we have started this process already. And I hope that we're going to get some results.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sati. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, I know I'm 4 minutes into time, but thank you very much. Let's give the panelists a round of applause. Therefore, I hand over this session back to the hall.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kamuthei. Please let's give the presenters and the moderator a final round of applause again. Yes, as it is often in events like this, we tend to take breaks. Number one, to freshen up a little bit. Number two, not to run into the risk of the senior moments coming a little bit too early. And so we're going to have a tea break. And I want to urge and encourage all of you, please, to come back, because the next session will be talking about the impact of the conflict. And I think that is something we all have an interest in hearing. And so I expect that all of us are going to make an effort to come back. If you're a diplomat, if you don't come back, you run the risk of us declaring you persona non grata. And if you're a civilian, we may revoke your visa. So please be careful. Tea will be served from the place where we took our photo session. I suggest we take maybe 15 minutes. We are as quick as possible so we can come back and ensure that the time we wasted in the morning when we were waiting for our key guests to come, we're able to make it up before the end of today. But I encourage everybody, please come back. This is a very important discussion. And thank you very much. Let's go back to the place where we took our photo session and have tea very quickly, then come back in time. Thank you. Welcome to tea.
Once you have that panel, the focus will focus on the panel. I will not remember who.
What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa?
the major security issues in the Horn of Africa today?
What are the changing dynamics of terrorism and violent extremism in Africa? How does their expanded ideological foundations that include politicization of religion look like in Africa?
What are the roles of internal and external actors in the conflict dynamics in the region?
Why is sustainable peace and security so elusive in the Horn of Africa region?
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies is a non-partisan research and policy think-do tank that is responding to some of these challenges.
The Horn Institute.
Horn Institute.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn of International Institute for Strategic Studies.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn International Institute.
What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa? What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa today?
What are the changing dynamics of terrorism and violent extremism in Africa? How does their expanded ideological foundations that
What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa today?
What are the changing dynamics of terrorism and violent extremism in Africa? How does their expanded ideological foundations that include politicization of religion look like in Africa?
What are the roles of internal and external actors in the conflict dynamics in the region?
Why is sustainable peace and security so elusive in the Horn of Africa region?
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies is a non-partisan research and policy think-do tank that is responding to some of these challenges.
The Horn Institute.
The Horn Institute.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn of International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
As a think-do methodology of active research, an interactive inquiry process balancing problem-solving actions and research through critical reflections.
We provide informed, evidence-based and problem-solving policy research and analysis on the Horn of Africa region.
We also engage in strategic communication for preventing and countering terrorism, as well as responding to conflicts and emerging threats.
Some of our focus
What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa today?
What are the changing dynamics of terrorism and violent extremism in Africa? How does their expanded ideological foundations that include politicization of religion look like in Africa?
What are the roles of internal and external actors in the conflict dynamics in the region?
Why is sustainable peace and security so elusive in the Horn of Africa region?
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies is a non-partisan research and policy think-do tank that is responding to some of these challenges.
The Horn Institute.
Horn Institute.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn of International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
As a think-do tank, the Horn contributes to the philosophy and methodology of active research, an interactive inquiry process balancing problem-solving actions and research through critical reflections.
We provide informed, evidence-based and problem-solving policy research and analysis on the Horn of Africa region.
We also engage in strategic communication for preventing and countering terrorism, as well as responding to conflicts and emerging threats.
Some of our focus areas include security, diplomacy, and terrorism.
We carry out action-oriented research in order to help inform policy making and action in defense and security in this region.
We focus on governance, statecraft, cross-border crimes, and strategic threats in 13 countries in the region.
We also study the ideological structures of violent extremist propaganda and develop counter and alternative narratives.
The Horn Academy regularly delivers tailor-made trainings on themes relating to the Institute's focus areas of defense and security, diplomacy and foreign relations, governance, statecraft and conflict management, transnational crimes and threats, and terrorism and violent extremism.
When I was selecting an organization to grow my knowledge and research skills, the Horn Institute was an easy choice for me. I liked the Institute's rigor and depth in research and teamwork.
The Horn Institute is a highly professional organization offering a very supportive environment for research.
Because of the reach and impact of our work, we were recently ranked number 18 as a think tank to watch by the Global Think Tank Index.
The Institute's convening power and the quality of its products makes it one of the leading think tanks in the region.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, objective, independent, definitive.
What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa today?
What are the changing dynamics of terrorism and violent extremism in Africa? How does their expanded ideological foundations that include politicization of religion look like in Africa?
What are the roles of internal and external actors in the conflict dynamics in the region?
Why is sustainable peace and security so elusive in the Horn of Africa region?
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies is a non-partisan research and policy think-do tank that is responding to some of these challenges.
The Horn Institute.
Horn Institute.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn of International Institute for Strategic Studies.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
As a think-do tank, the Horn contributes to the philosophy and methodology of active research, an interactive inquiry process balancing problem-solving actions and research through critical reflections.
We provide informed, evidence-based, and problem-solving policy research and analysis on the Horn of Africa region.
We also engage in strategic communication for preventing and countering terrorism, as well as responding to conflicts and emerging threats.
Some of our focus areas include security, diplomacy, and terrorism.
We carry out action-oriented research in order to help inform policy making and action in defense and security in this region.
We focus on governance, statecraft, cross-border crimes, and strategic threats in 13 countries in the region.
We also study the ideological structures of violent extremist propaganda and develop counter and alternative narratives.
The Horn Academy regularly delivers tailor-made trainings on themes relating to the Institute's focus areas of defense and security, diplomacy and foreign relations, governance, statecraft and conflict management, transnational crimes and threats, and terrorism and violent extremism.
When I was selecting an organization to grow my knowledge and research skills, the Horn Institute was an easy choice for me. I liked the Institute's rigor and depth in research and teamwork.
The Horn Institute is a highly professional organization offering a very supportive environment for research.
Because of the reach and impact of our work, we were recently ranked number 18 as a think tank to watch by the Global Think Tank Index.
The Institute's convening power and the quality of its products makes it one of the leading think tanks in the region.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, objective, independent, definitive.
What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa today?
What are the changing dynamics of terrorism and violent extremism in Africa? How does their expanded ideological foundations that include politicization of religion look like in Africa?
What are the roles of internal and external actors in the conflict dynamics in the region?
Why is sustainable peace and security so elusive in the Horn of Africa region?
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies is a non-partisan research and policy think-do tank that is responding to some of these challenges.
The Horn Institute.
Horn Institute.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn of International Institute for Strategic Studies.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
As a think-do tank, the Horn contributes to the philosophy and methodology of active research, an interactive inquiry process balancing problem-solving actions and research through critical reflections.
We provide informed, evidence-based, and problem-solving policy research and analysis on the Horn of Africa region.
We also engage in strategic communication for preventing and countering terrorism, as well as responding to conflicts and emerging threats.
Some of our focus areas include security, diplomacy, and terrorism.
We carry out action-oriented research in order to help inform policy making and action in defense and security in this region.
We focus on governance, statecraft, cross-border crimes, and strategic threats in 13 countries in the region.
We also study the ideological structures of violent extremist propaganda and develop counter and alternative narratives.
The Horn Academy regularly delivers tailor-made trainings on themes relating to the Institute's focus areas of defense and security, diplomacy and foreign relations, governance, statecraft and conflict management, transnational crimes and threats, and terrorism and violent extremism.
When I was selecting an organization to grow my knowledge and research skills, the Horn Institute was an easy choice for me. I liked the Institute's rigor and depth in research and teamwork.
The Horn Institute is a highly professional organization offering a very supportive environment for research.
Because of the reach and impact of our work, we were recently ranked number 18 as a think tank to watch by the Global Think Tank Index.
The Institute's convening power and the quality of its products makes it one of the leading think tanks in the region.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, objective, independent, definitive.
What are the major security issues in the Horn of Africa today?
What are the changing dynamics of terrorism and violent extremism in Africa? How does the expanded ideological foundations that include politicization of religion look like in Africa?
What are the roles of internal and external actors in the conflict dynamics in the region?
Why is sustainable peace and security so elusive in the Horn of Africa region?
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies is a non-partisan research and policy think-do tank that is responding to some of these challenges.
The Horn Institute.
The Horn Institute.
The Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies.
Order, please. Only one person can speak at a time. One person can speak at a time. Dr. Mustafa? Yes, you are breaking the law. Yes, with Ambassador Mwencha. So please, order, attention everybody. We need to start our next session. I think the morning session went very well. Now this is just a session before lunch. We are running a little bit late, so we're going to make it as brief as possible. I'm going to leave the rules to the next moderator. He's going to spell them out for you. And if there's going to be any Q&A, please, something wasn't mentioned. You're asking a question, keep it within 30 seconds. Response, keep it within 1 minute. That's the best way of managing time. So don't give a speech while we're asking a question. Okay. As much as you may want to say a lot of things, just keep it brief, so we can cover as many people and as many issues and as many questions as possible. So our next presenter is coming. I'm going to allow him to, not presenter, our moderator, to set the stage for the next session. Please.
Thank you, sir. Welcome back. My name is Ulf Lessing. I'm heading the Sahel program for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. I'm based in Mali, and it's a region, as you know, which is already very fragile. Wherever you look, there are military rulers, trying to achieve something, but they're in the middle of trying to survive themselves. So this panel is a very great opportunity to look a bit at the wider impact, the humanitarian situation. Myself, I was based in Sudan from 2011 to 2013. I was then the Reuters bureau chief. It was then already, when Sudan was supposedly normal, to put it cynically, the biggest producer of migrants and refugees in Africa, more or less. If you look at Nuba Mountains, Darfur, South Sudan, it was already then a terrible situation. And now if you look at this humanitarian disaster, it's getting worse. So people in the region understandably get a bit frightened what might happen next. So that's it's a good way to start. We have three distinguished guests. Monica Camacho, humanitarian representative for MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières. It's a year for Central Africa and Eastern Africa. MSF is an organization which I really admire. Whenever the UN and embassies leave, they stay behind and basically take care of what's left on the ground to sort out the mess. So glad to have you. Then we have also Mr. Rashid Abdi, a distinguished analyst, head of Horn and Africa and Gulf at the for the Sahan research, and he was a long-time director at Crisis Group, widely quoted analyst. Thanks for being with us. And last but not least, Mr. Moon Zhao, also, distinguished, expert on the region, head of program, at the National Defense College, the National Security University in Kenya, produced a lot of, research papers and also consultancies and conflict resolution. So glad to have you as well. And Mrs. Camacho, do you want to start, please? And if you can maybe limit us to 10 minutes or so, I think then we have more time for Q&A. Thank you very much. Please welcome Ms. Camacho. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Monica Camacho. I am the humanitarian representative for MSF, Doctors Without Borders in English. I'm very glad that the coffee break took place because after the eminences, the ambassadors' interventions, it was really a tough continuation. So I will try my best to give you a glance of how the picture looks at the moment, okay? How that conflict is translated in the lives of many of the Sudanese colleagues. You have the presentation? So next, I will try to show you the understanding of the humanitarian landscape. I'm using information. I'm using internal information. I'm using public information from OCHA, from UNHCR. Joanina is here, so I'm using the people that are in the best position to gather the comprehensive picture. This is the map of Sudan. As you can see, this is a conflict map, and it shows the latest population numbers in terms of displacement, conflict, and the different hot spots. Next. I think the points to remark here is that already the conflict is affecting more than 5 million people, at least estimated, in terms of displacement, both internally and external. So we are talking about more than 4 million people internally displaced, and more than 1 million that have crossed the different borders to the neighboring countries. The fight continues, and a lot of attention is given to Khartoum, but important to bear in mind, as you see the different hot spots, how the conflict has really spread to different parts of the country. Particular concerns from a humanitarian perspective is Khartoum, the vicious and terrible situation that the population is going through, and Darfur. As well, different spots are affected, but in terms of numbers, in terms of lack of access, lack of visibility, I think those two major spots are a major concern. The country was already having a severe economical crisis, a health system that was already in a very bad situation. So with the crisis, it's just have made it worse. Our teams are supporting, well, I will show later what we are doing, but we're already starting to see the impact of the breakdown of the system, if you want. In terms of cholera, different outbreaks are taking place. We have measles, we have cholera, and dengue for the population that are left inside the country. And this is not only Khartoum. We are having reports on Gedaref and very little visibility on Darfur, but we have reports as well on Al-Fashi. Another point I want to stress it's how the crisis is not only affecting Sudan, it's a regional crisis. I think it's everybody in this room acknowledges how not only the neighboring countries have welcomed the refugees, but how the refugees are settling. Who is the in charge? This is a table from UNHCR showing the caseload, the distribution of population numbers in terms of refugees. And as you can see, Chad, and we have later an intervention from Chadian perspective, which I think is very important. Almost 500,000 people already stationed there. A very close follow by South Sudan. Next. For East Chad, I'm using two samples. I'm using Chad and South Sudan to show how situations are developing. Chad is already receiving or has received already 418,000 refugees, 70% located in Adre region. And the caseload per day is more or less 1,000 new arrivals per day. So that can show you the magnitude of the influx that Chad is receiving. And despite the fact that the rainy season is around the corner, the flow of people, due to the intensity of clashes in different areas of Darfur, continues. Next. I'm using the map of South Sudan just to show how the refugees are crossing, and it applies, I think this analysis applies to all the countries receiving the refugees, Chad, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Egypt, I'm less familiar, so I will need your help. But we are talking about hard-to-reach areas, so the refugees are already entering in areas that are very, very inaccessible, with already with a very stranded health system, where the provision of services is very difficult, where a level of instability as well is already present. So they are putting more pressure in local communities, in already existing conflicts, in health systems or social systems that are very fragile and very exposed. So this is the areas of South Sudan where the refugees are entering. The main entry point is Rank, but they are being distributed very fast to different parts of the northern Upper Nile, Jonglei, and Unity states. Madagascar receiving fewer numbers, but it's still very hard to reach and very hard to deliver services in a proper manner. Some of the major challenges to be able to deliver assistance inside Sudan. We are back to Sudan. I'm taking you back to Sudan. Is with the conflict, how the different structure and systems of the government of Sudan have struggled, for not to say collapse, and that has created a massive amount of bureaucratic impediments. The system is trying to reset and reestablish, but that in terms of delivering of assistance means a massive amount of bureaucratic impediments. There are no clear processes, there are no visas, there are no cargos. We are an organization that we are, like Ulf kindly mentioned, when everybody's leaving, we are entering. We have a massive capacity to develop, to mobilize resources in terms of medical supplies and medical staff, and we haven't been able to deliver to the extent that we will have capacity. So in terms of visas, cargos, and travel permits are major obstacles. The government is semi-functional or partially functional, and we are confronted with new or parallel authorities in different regions or states, which is a concern, I think something that needs to be said. Different authorities that, despite the fact that they might be still in place, are changing roles and responsibilities, so it's hard to engage and to know who is the main authority. And I will say at all levels, the the authorities, the chain of command is not always clear. So despite the fact that we might get reassurances at a high level, it's not translated in the same way to the field level. So that provides a massive and stable environment. Next. What we call access is the possibility for us to deliver as humanitarian actors and for the population to be able to access medical services or any humanitarian service. With the active conflict and the violence, it's an extremely unstable and volatile conflict. So that makes any intervention very, very risky. We have other impediments like floods, rains, and as I mentioned, areas that are very remote. Travel permits, and this applies for both, let's say, both parties in the conflict, not only government or self-control areas, but RSF control areas. And as humanitarian actors, there is a massive lack of respect of international humanitarian law. It's something that I think in the room there are a lot of diplomats, and I think it's a message from our side on how there are basic rules in the war, and that's the work of the humanitarian law. In the case of Sudan, civilian population is just submitted to the most atrocious situations with attacks on healthcare in our case. So we have hospitals, health staff, ambulances completely destroyed, attacked, occupied, and the very few services remaining are not available for the civilian population. Next. What we are doing, since we didn't leave, as most of in the very early moments of the conflict, we managed to remain. We remain functional in some of the remote areas, Jebel Marra, and some of the projects in the eastern part with the refugees, the Ethiopian refugees that came with the conflict in Ethiopia. We managed to maintain that functional. And we scaled up. We had to change gear, like we said, and deliver trauma services and all medical services for population that is on the move. We have done around 94,000 medical consultations, and it's at this point for us, the surgeries are a major. Not even I think our worst situations were. Syria, and we have Sudan already has, in these 6 months of war, has already passed our record of trauma surgeries in any conflict at any given time. So it's already, and the number just keeps on increasing. So it's something that is worth mentioning. We have as well a strong capacity for response to outbreaks. You have heard about the nasty things that nobody likes to do, and we are the only ones doing, the Ebolas and the things. We deal with the outbreaks, and our teams are at the moment dealing with measles, cholera, an increase of malaria, already reported in Khartoum and different areas of Omdurman, and dengue. So this is a massive concern, and all the water provision, all the latrines, all the services that the community requires are collapsed, contaminated, or destroyed. So that the risk of cholera is something that is putting our teams in a high alert. And we are working with besides the direct hands-on, our teams are directly. Next, please. We have a large number of Sudanese colleagues and an important number of internationals. At the moment, we have around 50 internationals that support the national teams in delivering assistance. We have international teams in Khartoum, Omdurman, the eastern part, Gedaref. Very hard to, but we are trying to reach Jenin, and we have teams in El Fashir. So we have a quite a spread range of services and teams trying to operate. Besides trauma, I think the other area that we are focusing at the moment is trying to support other essential services like obstetric services, all the maternal health. With all the collapse of the system, we are trying to help the very semi-functional, very few functional hospitals. We are trying to help them to maintain their capacity. Next. And I think from my side, I put two, but I will include one more after listening the ambassadors in the previous presentations. I think important to mention some of our asks to different levels is the importance of all the parties in the conflict to guarantee and grant and allow and hinder access to humanitarian assistance. This is not a call, it's almost a plea. There is nobody else able to assist people. The systems, the government is trying to reestablish themselves, but it's taking a heavy toll in human lives. So we really need this message to be loud and clear. As people are preparing for negotiations, your brilliant minds are going to pass important messages. I think this is one that I think is important that you take back home. We are calling everybody for an urgent need to scale up. That's different donors. There are as well donors in the room. I think it's important that people understand that this is a crisis that is far from over. We would like to have those negotiation alternatives being finalized, but I think we all acknowledge the complexity and the dimensions of the conflict, and I think the level of destruction and damage is already considerable. And the third one is, it was mentioned before, it's a political, economical, and social crisis. The humanitarian agenda should be respected and not used in those negotiation tables. Those are political negotiations, so for us it's important that that space is maintained as neutral and protected and safeguarded. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Monica. It was really interesting. I mean, it's impressive that you still have 15 expat staffs in really difficult regions in Sudan, and even more impressive that RSF people, I mean, I know myself, they work for a fraction of a normal salary. It's basically a voluntary organization who is dedicated to the cause of helping ease humanitarian crisis like in Sudan. So thanks again. Please now give a warm welcome to Mr. Abdi. It's your turn. Thank you very much.
Let me first of all take this opportunity to thank the Horn Institute as well as Konrad Adenauer Foundation for inviting and putting this conference together. I would also like to thank some of the colleagues who I haven't met for many years, including my boss, Fuad Hekmat, who is here, and also friends who I haven't met. And also I want to say that my work has been made easier because we had excellent presentations from the elders in the room, Ambassador Haile Menkarios as well as Ambassador Sati, who between them I think bring together considerable expertise on Sudan. So I don't want to repeat a lot of what was said, but just to cover three issues. One is the military dynamics on the ground. Conflicts do not end until something shifts on the ground. And it is important, I think, to keep our heads cool until we see some major shift within the conflict dynamics. The rapid support forces consolidated themselves in Khartoum, built themselves in urban areas, largely because the RSF is not a normal military army. It was designed for this kind of urban warfare. Its history goes back to the days of Bashir and the dictatorship, and it was designed actually as a tool to suppress discontent and as a tool for suppressing dissent. So they are quite brutal. Most of their history and ethos goes back to the days of the Darfur conflict. And so when RSF decided to embed itself in Khartoum and other urban spaces, they definitely were playing to their strength. And we saw how the army has struggled in the last 6 months to try to dislodge the RSF. The army tried to use the Air Force. That didn't work too well, caused civilian casualties. The Sudanese army is a professional army. Most of the commanders go through staff college, and they are sensitive to, using heavy weapons in urban settings. And so that also limited the ability of the Sudanese military to actually dislodge the RSF. So the battle for Khartoum has become very vicious because it is the big prize. And these two powerful belligerents have thrown everything they have in this conflict. So we have now a grinding stalemate, which is beginning to some extent give way to, with the Sudanese armed forces actually saying, we cannot destroy this country, we cannot continue fighting and win, a city that has been pulverized to the ground. So I think there is a calculation within the Sudanese army that now they need to look for another strategy. And this explains why Burhan has shifted the focus away from Khartoum to actually Port Sudan. So we are beginning to see the Sudanese armed forces begin to consolidate around the Port Sudan area to possibly build a strategic base there, in order so that the fight for Khartoum isn't as vicious as it is currently. That has led to speculation about what the trend or the trajectory of this conflict is going to be. There are analysts who actually say that what we are now seeing is actually a steady fragmentation of the conflict, in which the parties are so bruised and battered, they can no longer face each other, and so would rather cut their losses and create, pockets where they consolidate. So we have seen the RSF actually consolidate in Darfur, build, and also in other places in the West, and so we are beginning to see an organic fragmentation along power lines, but also ethnic lines in Sudan. We have seen similar patterns of conflict actually in Yemen, but also in Libya, where powerful belligerents who can no longer face each other on the battlefield decide to concentrate in small pockets. Now, whether that makes the resolution of conflict easier or harder, I will leave it to you to judge, but I think what we see is actually a steady disintegration of Sudan into small pockets and fiefdoms. We also see another disturbing dimension where the ethnic mobilization has now replaced political mobilization. And this is a country with a strong civic organization that was actually cross-ethnic. So for the first time, we are beginning to see ethnic enclaves and ethnic constituencies being used, being mobilized. Hemeti, as Ambassador Haile, indicated, comes from the periphery, and he has mobilized the clans from the ethnic groups from the periphery to fight against an elite in the center, the riverine belt, who control power and economic might. So this war is also fragmenting along center periphery. And this is, I think, quite important to understand. The RSF is not just a Sudanese phenomenon, it is also a geopolitical phenomenon. There is no other military outfit that also fought, that has also become recruits from actually the entire Sahel. And not many people talk about this, but RSF's core, fighters are actually Chadians. So this is a military organization that has already become externalized, has plugged itself into external powerful interests. It fought in the war in Yemen, where it gained considerable experience, but also, managed to tap into very powerful patronage systems in the Gulf. Then we saw how also the RSF became involved in the Libya conflict. We also know that the RSF leader, in particular, has considerable interest in the gold mining sector, but also controls financial systems in Sudan. So he is part of the political economy. And so this is also what His Excellency Ambassador Haile was also talking about, the Sudanese army, unlike other armies, is actually a major player in the political economy of the country and has a vested interest in the economy. And so the context is not just for power, but it's also about the future of the Sudanese economic state. Who controls the levers of the economy? Who controls the gold mines? And then who has access to also external markets? And also who can tap into these powerful patronage systems beyond the Sudanese border? The Sudanese conflict is a product of the current geopolitics. We live in a geopolitical age where there is no longer anything like a local conflict. Every conflict has geopolitical dimensions. Every conflict has external interests. And I think these are the powerful driving forces that actually make conflicts, that aggravate conflicts, feed conflict, but also make peacemaking quite complicated. And so we need to be aware of the geopolitical stakes, but also the geopolitical dimensions of Sudan. Sudan, geographically, is right at the center of Africa. It is the heart of Africa. If you look at immediately after the war broke out, and the Sudanese airspace was closed, did you notice what happened in the 48 hours? If you looked at the flight data, you'll actually be shocked. All flights coming from Asia, which were overflying the Sudanese airspace, had to be rerouted. They were going to Latin America, the Americas. So it is a very crucial country for aviation. Connects. If you are flying from Nairobi to London, historically you'll pass through Sudan. You'll use the Sudanese airspace. I'm just using that as an indication of the kind of economic disruptions. How flights are being rerouted and the economic cost of the Sudanese conflict. So nobody can actually say, even internationally, that they have not been impacted by the conflict in Sudan. Sudan also, as the ambassador also hinted, and also Dr. Mustafa hinted at, is part of a complex system which stretches from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. This is a fragile, unstable belt. And increasingly, we see also militaries becoming very central to that instability, especially in West Africa. Sudan is an example is a rare example of actually the army splitting into two, or structures of the army basically splitting into two and fomenting instability. And that makes the conflict much more serious because all actors, are confident they will win, but also are determined, as the ambassador said, to actually fight to the death. There is no love lost between Hemeti and Burhan. They hate each other. And, I remember during a radio interview, one person calling in and saying, if this is just a problem between Hemeti and Burhan, let's just give them pistols. And they just kill themselves, each other, shoot out classic Western style, and then all this conflict ends. But, the conflict is very intense, it's very visceral. It is actually personal fight between the two men. And that is a very dangerous dynamic. It's no longer rational. So you can talk about, why it is not in the strategic interest of Sudan to keep this fighting. But when these two men are inside the room together, they just want to shoot each other. And so when conflicts take that kind of very personal hatred, it becomes also difficult to resolve. So the Sudanese conflict now, has big impacts, immediate, of course, to countries like Chad. Chad is watching warily who will emerge victor, because that will have a direct impact on eastern Chad. Chad's stability is very much tied to the stability of Sudan, and in particular in western Darfur, because that's where many of the tribes which live in Chad also live in Sudan. Then also, I think we see very considerable interventions by the Egyptians. Egypt and Sudan have a long history, sometimes a history of cooperation, but sometimes a history of competition. They have not been stable friends, and so periodic tensions come up, but Egypt sees its national security very much tied to Sudan. You cannot remove Egypt from the room in any settlement, because Egypt will actually find a reason to intervene. And then you also have other powerful regional actors. Ethiopia, for example, has been, wanting to invest in peacemaking in Sudan for a long time, largely because of, this, again, Egyptian, stakes, but also, the politics of the Nile waters, and also the GERD also plays a factor into this. South Sudan is a very important player, in this conflict as well, because potentially it is a peacemaker, but also in the case of conflict fragmenting, and in the case of the conflict actually escalating and becoming worse, the implication for South Sudan is actually very dire. We will see immediately the collapse of the peace processes that have happened under the Hamdok government. In the last 5 years, Hamdok did a very important thing, which is to engage each and every rebel group and cut a peace deal with them.